Welcome to our Shades of Blue webcast for today on Friday. My name is Dr. Karen Long from NASA's Digital Learning Network, and I'm pleased to be able to welcome you to this webcast. I want to let you know that you'll be able to participate in today's webcast by emailing your questions to shadesofbluewebcast@gmail.com. That's shadesofbluewebcast@gmail.com. On today's program, we have a variety of wonderful guests for this morning's show. We have Dr. Dan Cherry, who is lead for NASA's Digital Learning Network. We have Eric Woods, who is president of the Black Pilots of America. Colonel George London Jr., president and chief flight instructor, the first African American test pilot instructor at Edwards Air Force Base. And we also have Herbert Jones Jr., an original Tuskegee Airman. I want you to stay tuned. We'll be right back with the program.
Captain Willie Daniels II, Shades of Blue founder and STEM pioneer, is a pilot for United Airlines in the District of Columbia metro area at Washington Dulles Airport. Captain Daniels established Shades of Blue in 1999 overseas overall operations of the organization, coordinating with school districts across the country. He recruits pilots, engineers, and scientists to classrooms as role models while mentoring and tracking students through college. The mission of Shades of Blue is creating educational opportunities, training, and employment assistance that is needed for youth to pursue careers in aviation, aerospace, and STEM industries.
Hello, I'm Captain Willie Daniels, and I'm the president of Shades of Blue and president and founder of Shades of Blue. We'd like to welcome all of you from as far as the Canary Islands, across the United States, all the way out to Honolulu, Hawaii. Today we have a very exciting group of folks that are coming in as our subject matter experts. And Shades of Blue, just to tell you a little bit about it, for those of you who are new to this webcast, is a unique organization that is designed to help create the future workforce. Please go to our website at www.ourshadesofblue.org for students and teachers to find out more information about it. We're going to not go through a lot of formal introductions for myself today because we have a lot of special guests here. Our very first guest is a gentleman out of the Goddard Space Flight Center, out of the Langley Research Center. His name is Dr. Dan Cherry, and Dan is the lead for the NASA's DLN. DLN, in terms of acronyms, stand for Digital Learning Network. And you're going to have a really exciting time, and later on I'll share some of the additional special guest for all of you to have an opportunity to learn and see what is available for you, and that will be available for you right in your classrooms as of today, fingertip touch. We'd like to welcome you to the Shades of Blue webcast.
Dr. Gamaliel Dan Cherry is the Collaboration and Talent Development Branch Head, as well as the NASA Digital Learning Network Lead. Dr. Cherry has served as a coach in the federal government and industry sectors for over 4 years, in addition to serving in the capacity of a coaching program manager. His experience includes the development and delivery of dynamic organization development solutions, ranging from the areas of roles and responsibilities to creativity consulting and course development. Dr. Cherry's program management experience includes managing projects that are in excess of $20 million while balancing stakeholder concerns and managing scope, cost, and schedule. Dr. Cherry holds a Bachelor's of Science in Education with a concentration in science, a Master's of Science in Education with a Cognitive and Instructional Design, and a PhD in Instructional Design with Cognites in Instructional Gaming and Cognitive Theory.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome our special guest, Dr. Dan Cherry. Thank you for being here on the webcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And broadcasting out to, we have students from as far out as the Canary Islands.
Awesome.
And we're going from Florida all the way up on the East Coast, out to California, and all the way out to Hawaii, who have joined us in this unique webcast that we've had for the last couple of days. And one of the greatest things that our country has developed over the last 50 plus years, when NASA began in October of 1958, you've had this rich resource of knowledge and material that you've gathered. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I, as my understanding, as one of the directors over at Langley Research Center, you guys have developed what we call a DLN,
yes,
a digital learning network.
Network.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it can benefit not only the schools and the school districts and the teachers and all of the students and the parents, how they can be involved? Because I think part of our problem in our country is the spin-offs that NASA has created over the years have not been translated to the general public. And if they can see some of those things, like, for example, our latest mission that went to Jupiter, the Juno mission. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate on that for me?
Absolutely. So, Captain Daniels, first, thank you for having the Digital Learning Network on the webcast. We're excited to be here and talk to you all out there in the internet about what NASA's Digital Learning Network is. So you mentioned earlier that NASA has a rich history of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And the Digital Learning Network started in 2003 with a group of 3 centers, and we've actually managed to expand to all 10 NASA centers, where we offer subject matter expert virtual connections. We offer virtual site visits where we take students and instructors and teachers and museum alliances, as well as anyone that wants to connect internationally, directly into an authentic learning experience in terms of our labs, our wind tunnels, our facilities. Sometimes we've done broadcasts from clean rooms. Mm-hmm. One of the other things that we offer, though, is our virtual interactive sessions. And so we have a suite of 10 virtual sessions that we offer to classrooms. Wow. Now, some teachers may call them modules, but we offer these on a regular basis, and you can register for those or learn how to register for those at dln.nasa.gov. That's dln.nasa.gov. And those virtual interactive sessions are aligned with the Common Core standards, also the NGSS standards. And they focus on one or many of the 6 priorities that NASA has right now in terms of our communications campaigns. So things like the Juno mission, we were able to do a webcast where we took the scientists and engineers and had a webcast, what we call a special event, to be able to reach out there to individuals just like yourself out in the classrooms, free of charge. All you have to have is just a webcam and a projector, and it's easy as lickety-split. Wow. We also support our connections with technical support. So we try to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for those of you who are out there in your classrooms. We want to make sure that we do everything we can to connect with you. So we offer technical support in terms of getting connected. We do test connections. We do everything possible to make sure that the experience in terms of the technology, is seamless and as transparent as possible, because the learning is what we're really interested in transferring to the students.
Wow, that's absolutely fabulous.
Thank you.
Now I have a question. Is this geared mainly for high school, or could you take this down to the preschool level?
That's a very good question. So our sessions are K-20 from the perspective
Wow.
of we can talk to kindergartners, or we can also talk to college students. And our DLN specialists, I'll tell anyone, our DLN specialists throughout all of the 10 NASA centers are what really make it go from the perspective of their subject matter expertise, their knowledgeability of being able to make those adjustments based on the audience that we have. So we're well equipped to be able to do that on sliding scale based on what the requirements are from the educators.
Wow. Now one of the things that just recently happened, we briefly touched on that, was the Jupiter mission, Juno. But just prior to that, where most of our students and audience might be familiar with is Project New Horizons. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So New Horizons is an opportunity for us to really take a look at the solar system in a much broader perspective, right? And it's focused on one particular area, and we were able to say, let's have a special event that's focused on that area. And so when you register for a particular session, that's how we find out that information, and we're able to connect directly. We can have a subject matter expert that comes in and talk about it, and also our DLN specialists are well equipped to talk about it too.
Oh, fantastic. Looks like we have a question from our audience.
That's great.
You don't mind taking a question?
Absolutely.
Okay. The first question is, what are some of the challenges you face in your career?
Wow. So interestingly enough, time was one of the biggest challenges that I faced in my career. And so I have a PhD in instructional design and technology. And one of the things that I'll tell young people throughout the world is that nothing beats a failure but a try. And also when you fail, it's about how you get back up. So a little bit about me, when I was taking my comprehensive examinations for my dissertation or for my PhD, I was not preparing myself in a way that I should have. And as a result, I failed my first round of my comprehensive examinations. And so that's a really scary proposition because you only get one other shot and then you're out of the program. So I had to buckle down. I had to make sure that I focused on the area that I needed to focus on, and I was able to pass, and here I am today.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Cherry, thank you very much. And for all of you educators out there that want to get your students, go to the NASA.gov website, type in
dln.nasa.gov.
dln.nasa.gov.
Yes,
thank you very much. And this is a great opportunity, and I hope they take advantage of this across our world.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right.
Eric Woods is the president of the Herbert Jones Jr. chapter of the Black Pilots of America in Washington, D.C. He spends many weekends at the local black-owned flight school, HJ Aviation, helping to manage operations and teaching ground school classes. Eric attended Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, the first school for science and engineering in North America in Troy, New York. Mr. Woods then completed his Bachelor of Science degree at Howard University in Chemical Engineering in 1984. Eric has since been recruited to join the Department of Defense as a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear CBRN engineer. After more than 10 years with the DOD, Eric continues this day as a subject matter expert in CBRN defense, software development, business process improvement, mass warning and communication systems, and systems engineering.
My next guest is Mr. Eric Woods, who is with the BPA, the Black Pilots of America. Eric, thank you very much for coming in and being a part of this opportunity to share across the world the opportunities that are available. As an airline pilot, I've been with United Airlines now for 38 years. I've been flying airplanes for about 42 years. Since I was about 17 years of age, I took my very first flight at 16. And the opportunities that are available in the aviation field, for example, right now, in America alone, we're going to lose due to retirement, because I'm one of those old guys that will be retiring here in the next 5 years. And we are going to need about 69,000 airline pilots here in the United States.
Wow.
Now, we extrapolate that across the world, and these are some real numbers. They're accurate numbers. based on Boeing statistics that indicate that worldwide we're going to be short by 2032 565,000 pilots worldwide shortage. Now, this is a golden opportunity for our young people that want to get into the pipeline, that want to think about being a pilot, to do that. Can you tell us a little bit about BPA and how that will help these young people become professional aviators?
Sure. The Black Pilots of America is a nationwide organization. We have 23 chapters across the country, and one of our major goals is to promote the youth in aviation, especially disadvantaged youth. As you pointed out, the pilot shortage that we're going to have to deal with, one of the things that contributes to that shortage is how difficult it is to get started, how expensive it is, and how it actually works. You know, airlines just don't hire pilots off the street. You usually have to bring yourself to a certain point and then hope that they will pick you up. So one of the missions of the Black Pilots of America is try to help bridge that gap and how to help young people get started and get to that point. I also started when I was 16 and got my license at 17. But I didn't know anybody that flew, and my motivation was just the airport shows and TV. But I had supportive parents, and I was able to work part-time at Geno's. It's kind of like a McDonald's, and be able to get my license. So I look today at the challenges, and that's why I'm so passionate about BPA and what we do to bridge that gap. And one of those things we do is our Summer Flight Academy. We've actually been doing this for over 43 years. It's currently in Texas, in Houston. It's 2 weeks during the summer. And we have students ages 14 to 19.
Wow.
And it's a 2-week program, and you study the first half of the day and you fly the second half of the day.
Okay.
And we also get a visit to the Space Flight Center in Houston, and we have other side activities. And one of the main things is they get to live on a college campus for 2 weeks. So they get to envision themselves actually being in college, actually going to college. And so it's not a foreign thing anymore, or something that seemed to be, you know, out of reach. And as a result of that, the head of the program has gotten many letters from parents saying, you know, what have you done to my child? They're focused, they do their homework now, they're studying, they're motivated. I mean, I can't believe this is the same kid. So we like to kind of spread that and see that happen more across the country.
Wow, that's absolutely fabulous. And you'll be able to, for the audience out there, we'll be able to link you up through our organization at OurShadesOfBlue.org with BPA, and be able to provide that opportunity to, you know, I think it's an absolutely fantastic way for a young person to be introduced to aviation. And you can imagine going and spending, say, a week learning all about the principles of flight, thrust, lift, drag, and gravity, and all of those types of things, the aerodynamic lift of an airplane. And then after you learn that, then getting into a real airplane and applying that by being a pilot. That's fantastic. Now, looks like we have a question coming in.
Sure.
I have never ridden in a plane. How can I learn to fly one?
You may also want to check into the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association. The Experimental Aircraft Association has a Young Eagles program, and they do free demonstration flights for kids. In fact, as part of our meeting, we have a flying competition, Black Pilots of America, every Memorial Day weekend in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. We do some EAA Young Eagles flights, and this past year we flew over 178 kids on their first flights, and in an airplane at all, you know, much less. So I would definitely go out to your local airport or look into the EAA Young Eagles program.
And just to add a little bit to that, the Experimental Aircraft Association was founded a few years ago. It was with an idea of taking and getting 1 million students an airplane ride In 1903, when the Wright brothers first flew the Wright Flyer in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, it flew less than the wingspan of a 747. But their goal was by 100 years to get 1 million kids an airplane ride. They reached that goal, and it's my understanding now that they're above 2.5 million students that have actually got an airplane ride through the Young Eagles. And for those of you who have questions, please feel free to contact us at the Shades of Blue webcast at gmail.com. That's the Shades of Blue webcast at gmail.com. And I think it's absolutely wonderful and fantastic that you can be here and share that opportunity. One of the things that we have done with Shades of Blue in the various parts of the country is we take professional airline pilots alongside of certified flight instructors. Certified flight instructors, for example, are our subject matter experts. They are blessed by the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Administration, to be able to certify an individual has the qualifications that it needs to get in an airplane, take off, fly safely, and return home safely. It looks like we have another question coming in. Who encouraged you to become a pilot?
Actually, I did.
Okay.
I actually didn't know anyone that flew, and after I got my license, I actually thought I was the only black pilot in Washington, D.C., because when I went out to the airport and took my lessons, I never saw anybody that looked like me, and went back home and just came out for lessons, and it wasn't until after I graduated from college and came back into aviation, I decided to investigate some of the other airports around, and then I found out that there were a ton of black pilots, and I thought I was the only one.
But that goes to show you, in certain communities across our country, we don't realize that those opportunities are available. But on this webcast today, you now know that the opportunities are available. If you're out there in the Canary Islands, I'm pretty sure that there's a small airport, or might even be a large airport out there you could go out to and fly. Coming across to the U.S. and going all the way across the country, we have thousands and thousands of airports out there that you can go out and be introduced and exposed. As an airline pilot, I work with United Airlines, and we have over 13,000 pilots at United, and I can guarantee each one of us have our own unique story on what it took for us to become an airline pilot. We have avenues such as what I did. I started out working a week to pay for 1 hour of flying. I built up my hours to get my private pilot's license. I continued to work. Got a pilot's degree in school, in junior college, because I didn't have a lot of money. And then I moved over to a 4-year college. And I actually went from there after I graduated with a commercial pilot certificate and an instrument rating. I was fortunate enough that United Airlines saw me, and they hired me not as a pilot, but as a flight attendant. And I started out as a flight attendant where I worked for 8.5 years in the back. And you say, why would he do that? Well, guess what? It gave me a foot in the door. That opened up the door for me to be able to go in flight from in the cabin up into the cockpit. And I could observe the professional pilots that were up there in the cockpit that was flying. And I could see what they were doing, and I would talk with them. And one of the things that I asked the captain one time, I said, what do you consider to be a good first officer? And this is some fabulous words of advice that he turned around to me and said. He said to me, a good first officer for me is to be that information that I need when I need to make that critical decision.
Wow.
In other words, you need to know everything you need to know when you know it.
Yep.
And it looks like we have another question that comes in. Who inspired you to work with the Black Pilots of America?
Well, Just so happens that the person that inspired me to do that is here today and is going to be another one of our guests in a few minutes.
And what's that gentleman's name?
Mr. Herbert Jones.
Mr. Herbert Jones.
Mr. Herbert Jones is an original Tuskegee Airman.
Oh my goodness.
And upon leaving service, he was very active in the civilian community, and today he's known as the godfather of black aviation in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely fantastic.
He had a club called the Cloud Club 2, about 3 airplanes, 4 or 5 at one time, and really has been there as a mentor and a guide for virtually every black pilot in D.C. for that entire 30-year span. Could attribute some of their success to Mr. Jones.
Wow. Well, we'll look forward to having that conversation with Mr. Jones. Hey, I want to thank you, Mr. Woods, for coming in and sharing with our students all across the country, and thank you for what you're doing to help better the future of our nation.
Well, thank
it's
you,
greatly
sir.
appreciated.
Nice to be with you.
Colonel George London Jr., USAF RAT, is the President and Chief Flight Instructor at HJ Aviation in Wilmington, North Carolina. Colonel London is the first African-American test pilot instructor at the U.S. Air Force Test Pilot School, TPS, at Edwards Air Force Base in California. During his career, he flew over 51 different aircraft, was instructor on 5, and was the C-17 maiden flight test pilot. Several of his students went on to fly the space shuttle. George holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from North Carolina, A&T, and a Master of Science degree in Aeronautic Engineering from the Air Force Institute of Technology, AFIT.
And we have another special guest, Mr. George London.
Right.
And George is following on our last visitor, Mr. Woods, as another one of our subject matter experts.
That's right.
And George is here to tell you a little bit about himself. And this is another one of the avenues that the students, if they don't go through the private sector to get a pilot's license, they might want to consider the possibility of a military. And could you tell us, Mr. London, a little bit about yourself and about some of the things that took you into aviation?
Okay, actually when I was a teenager, I used to go to the air show in Wilmington, North Carolina and watch the guys fly, and I said, wow, we'd like to do that. But back in the 60s, it wasn't a thing that we could do. But eventually I went in the military because my parents couldn't afford to send me to college. So I went in the military to use the GI Bill. And then when I got out, went to college, and they were looking for students to become members of the ROTC.
Okay.
I said, well, if you can get me a pilot slot, I'll be delighted. So they were able to get me a pilot slot, so got in the ROTC and went back in the military. And then I went to the pilot training at Webb Air Force Base in Texas, and remained there as an instructor in T-38s when I finished pilot training. Stayed there for 4 years, and then they closed Webb, and I moved to McGuire flying 141s. While I was at McGuire, I decided that I wanted to get my master's degree, so I got accepted to get my master's in aeronautic engineering at Air Force Institute of Technology in Wright-Patterson, Ohio. Shortly after that, I applied to test pilot school, figuring I would not get selected because I just finished a master's program. But I got picked up for test pilot school and went out to Edwards and become a test pilot. This is 1984 when I finished.
Wow.
Was lucky enough to go back to test pilot school in '88 as the first black instructor test pilot, Air Force Test Pilot School.
Wow.
And in 1990, I got selected to become part of the C-17 program and was selected to fly the first flight on the first airplane in 1991, September 15th, first C-17 flight.
Wow. Wow. For those of you who don't know where the test pilot school is, it's actually out in Southern California and near Palmdale, California.
Yeah, Edwards Air Force Base.
And I actually lived in that area when I was a small kid, growing up back in the early '60s. That's how I got inspired to want to be a pilot. And my initial goal was to be an astronaut. Because every morning I wake up and I all of a sudden hear these loud booms, boom, in the sky. It was a sonic boom, and I didn't know it was folks like Captain Ed DeWhite or Colonel Chuck Yeager, and all of those folks like that out breaking the sound barrier. but they were testing the envelope of the equipment that I fly for now. And in order for me to get into a 777 airplane and fly it 14 hours, someone had to test that airplane out to make sure it was safe for me to, first of all, get in it and fly it, but safe and comfortable for the passengers.
That's correct.
And that's admirable for you. And you retired as a colonel?
Full colonel, yes.
Full bird colonel. And now that you retired as a colonel, you decided to translate what you're doing with your master's degree. And I put emphasis on, notice he has a master's degree. And we put emphasis on that because that translates into what you're currently doing. But we'll come back to that here in just a second, because it looks like we have another question from the audience. Have you had lots of experiences? What is the one thing that you're most proud of?
Actually, I'm most proud of the being selected and flying the first flight on the C-17 in 1991.
Wow.
Ironically, I was the only black test pilot, only black pilot in the organization. I was selected to fly the first flight, and a year later I became the commander of the test squadron for that organization. So I had 5 airplanes worth $1.2 billion.
Wow.
And I ran the flight test portion of a $40 billion program. And I had 900 people working for me. Today, I still work. I teach high school and school here in the local area.
Oh, fantastic. And I want to emphasize what he just mentioned in terms of cost of equipment. He mentioned $1.2 billion. $1.2 billion, that's a lot of money. and that's a lot of responsibility.
Absolutely.
So I can't overemphasize study hard. Learn everything you can about everything. Whether it's a subject that you think is not very good and it's never going to benefit you, pick up a book and read it. And what you'll find, and you put all of this information in your bag of knowledge, and one day you will reach into your bag of knowledge when you least expect it and pull it out and say, that situation happened to me 30 years ago.
It works.
And this is how I get out of it. Now, I understand you have some students.
Oh yes, we have students at McNamara. I have an aviation club there, so they do the ground school, come out to the airport to fly with us. We also support the Tuskegee Airman East Coast Chapter. They have students come fly with us. And the Omega fraternity has a program, I believe I Can Fly. So they send students our way also. So our goal is to help as many young people, but also help the older people get into aviation. It's been a doorway that's opening a lot of opportunities for a large number of people.
Well, I'd like to tell you, because we host aviation courses working with a lot of the school districts and things like that. And one of the things that I encourage the parents to come out and participate and sit in on the classes. And I remember one time a parent came out and he was sitting in the class and he was there every session. These were Saturday classes that lasted 2 hours, teaching the students about everything from the basic principles of flight, navigation, weather, all of those types of things that they'll be encountering. And this guy was there, and I went over and talked to him. Hey, why are you here? And he said, because this is something that I always wanted to learn. And so for you students who have parents, tell your parents to come out and be a part of it as well. And it looks like we have another question coming in. Did you have any students that went on to work for NASA?
Oh, absolutely. When I was instructor test pilot school, I had a few students that worked for NASA, not only worked for NASA, but they were astronauts.
Wow.
After the Challenger blew up, a couple years later, the first flight was flown by Eileen Collins. She was the first student that I instructed when I was in instructor test pilot school.
Wow.
And then Pam Melroy, who was an astronaut, came down to work for me when I was in the C-17 program, and she applied to NASA. For an astronaut, I wrote a letter of recommendation, and she said, if I get selected, I invite you down for a couple of launches, which she did.
Well, that's pretty phenomenal, because when you speak of Eileen Collins, for those of you who don't know Eileen Collins was the very first shuttle commander, female shuttle commander. That's pretty significant, because you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar project that's going to be launching up and into space around orbiting around the Earth at 17,500 miles an hour, and now you are the commander of that. So that means that for all of you young ladies out there, you can follow in Eileen Collins' footsteps. But another significant flight that she did, in 2003, we had a tragic event that occurred, which was the loss of the Columbia. But they worked to determine what were the problems, and they fixed those problems. And Eileen Collins was the next commander that took the mission after that, the return to flight mission.
Okay.
That got NASA back moving again. So
with the Challenger, Rick Husband was in the class ahead of me at test pilot school. He was the commander of the Challenger.
Wow, this is absolutely fantastic. Looks like we have another question coming in. What do you like most about teaching young people to fly?
I like teaching young people, period, not only to fly, but I challenge their math skills, their science skills.
I like that.
And also their English skills. I mean, even though you have a technical background, you're required to write papers, write reports. So your skill and knowledge across all bases of education is very, very important. But just watching someone go to fly by themselves for the first time is ecstatic. Parents are a little nervous, but kids enjoy it.
Yeah. And speaking on that, in terms of knowledge and everything, and for all of those folks out there that want to call in and ask a question, don't forget to go to our webcast. It's at shadesofbluewebcast@gmail.com. And going back to what the students need to know and things, you need to know math, science, geography, history, physics.
Yes.
Yeah, all those things that you're studying in school right now. And just don't be mediocre at it. Excel to be A+ students in every one of those categories. Because when I get in the airplane and I'm traveling across the world, guess what I encounter? I encounter math. I encounter geography. I'm operating in a fluid environment, so the atmosphere is changing every second. We're flying through the sky at over 500 miles per hour. And we're flying into another country. So sometimes I might arrive into a country like Japan, and I like to say, konnichiwa, I kaga desu ka? So I learned to speak to those folks in their language.
Right.
And it's really, really appreciated. Well, Mr. London, it looks like it's been a very, very wonderful opportunity to have a chance to meet you and have you come on and be one of our subject matter experts.
Delighted.
You know, if it wasn't for the work that you do as a test pilot, you know, I probably wouldn't be here today. So thank you very much, and thank you for being a part of this.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
You're
One
welcome.
mission for the world. Thank you.
Herbert Jones Jr. left Washington, D.C. in 1943 to enroll in the Coffey School of Aviation in Chicago, Illinois. The Coffey School participated in the civilian pilot training program and provided students with an opportunity to become aviation cadets at Tuskegee Army Air Corps. His studies there were interrupted in 1944 when he was inducted into the U.S. Army as an aviation cadet at Kessler Field, Mississippi. He was then transferred to Tuskegee Army Airfield, where he started pilot training program, but was later assigned overseas to artillery service during the Italian campaign of World War II. After the war, Herb resumed his flight training and received a commercial license with an instructor's rating. After leaving active duty, he joined the Air Force Reserve and completed flight training along with a partner. Herb took over the operation of Columbia Air Center, Croom, Maryland, thus becoming one of the first civilian aviation authority licensed airports operated by African Americans.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm now here. I'm in awe because I have a gentleman here that is a truly honored hero in our nation. Back during World War II, there was an experiment that took place by our government, and that experiment was called the Tuskegee experiment. And if you look at that experiment, what it did across our nation, it created a generation of individuals that are second to none. We are fortunate this morning, and this is something for all of the audience. You can say you had an opportunity to hear and speak to a real Tuskegee Airman. And back in the 40s, this experiment was designed to prove that these folks couldn't succeed. And despite of all the odds, they did. And they became national heroes. We have with us Mr. Herbert Jones. Thank you, Mr. Jones, for being here, being able to share some of your stories.
Okay.
And we're talking to young folks across from out of the Canary Islands, across the United States, all the way out to California and Hawaii, and this is being broadcast pretty much all over the world right now. So welcome, and can you tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about the Tuskegee Airmen and about the Tuskegee experience?
Well, when I was a young man, I had an interest in flying, or interest in aviation. And then the Tuskegee program came along, and that was an opportunity for some of us to learn to fly. And I met a man down there by the name of C. Alfred Anderson. And Alfred Anderson is what we consider the father of black aviation. And he taught me primary flying at Tuskegee. And he also did, talking about Anderson, he did a lot of long distance flights. He and a man by the name of Dr. Albert Forsythe flew down to Haiti many years ago, and when that was a big deal back there. And Anderson became the chief flight instructor at the primary flight school at Tuskegee. And he was, as I said before, we consider him the father of black aviation. And there were some others also, a man out of Chicago by the name of Cornelius R. Coffey, who ran the government program at Harlem Airport. And then there was another man in the D.C. area who came from Boston by the name of John W. Green, who ran the Columbia Air Center right here in Maryland. So all these guys, all of these people really made great contributions to aviation, especially to blacks in aviation, because there was a time when according to the old CAA records, there were only about 20 or 30 black people licensed as pilots in the United States. So John Green, Cornelius Coffey, and some others made great contributions as far as blacks are concerned in the field of aviation.
And it's my understanding that Mr. Anderson, also known as Chief Anderson, around Moton Field in Tuskegee, Alabama, he actually had an encounter at one point with a famous person. That was the wife of President Roosevelt, Miss Eleanor Roosevelt. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. She, on one of her visits to Tuskegee, she went out to Moton Field, and she decided she wanted to fly with one of the pilots out there. So Chief Anderson, of course, at that time was the chief pilot out there. And I remember that the people who were with her did not want her to fly with Chief Anderson because they didn't think that it would be safe. But she said no, she wanted to fly with Chief Anderson. So he flew the President of the United States' wife in the Piper Cub there at Moton Field.
That's absolutely amazing. Because I've heard that story, and I understand that there was so much opposition to her getting in the airplane, but the Tuskegee Airmen had been doing all of this training there and everything. And the commanding officers out there at the time says, no, we can't let her fly with them. And she says, no, I want to fly with them. And when she got there, she says, I want to fly with Chief Anderson. And after that flight came in, they was amazed that here comes the First Lady landing and everything. But what she did with that information afterwards is she came back to Washington, D.C. with information for her husband, President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And she told President Roosevelt, I flew with the Tuskegee Airmen, and because of that, that moved the entire program forward, and it allowed the original 99th Pursuit Squadron to be formed, that was headed up by Colonel B.O. Davis Jr., who went to West Point at the time back in the late 30s. And while he was there, he was ostracized. But he became the very first commander for the 99th Pursuit Squadron. And we'll cover a little bit of that. But looks like we have a question coming in for you. The question is, what was your biggest challenge being a Tuskegee Airman?
Well, the general thought in this country was that black people cannot fly complicated military aircraft. And the Tuskegee program showed that that was not a true statement, that the black pilots that came through the Tuskegee program were as competent as the pilots that came through the other programs.
Well, I understand that, I think it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, back in 1928, there was a edict put out, a study done by the United States War Department at the time that did this study, and they took African Americans, and they said that African Americans had small brains, they had small concepts, and they didn't have enough capability to handle sophisticated equipment and so forth. And because of that, they said we should not be getting into airplanes and flying airplanes. And that was the whole basis for the Tuskegee experiment that took place about 10, 15 years later, to prove that you could not get in an airplane and fly. But because of that, you guys proved the total opposite of that. You got in, you worked hard, you studied hard, you flew hard, you flew extra hard because you had to overcome. And the nickname I understand for the Tuskegee Airmen, once they went into combat over with the 99th Pursuit Squadron, was the double V. Was the double V stood for double victory, which meant we had to go fight a victory overseas in Europe, and then come back here to America and fight another victory, which was against the racism and everything that went on during that part of our epic in our history. Looks like we have another question coming in. What are you most proud of in your career?
Well, I was selected for flight training. Yeah, and that was a very, very proud moment for me, because I always wanted to fly airplanes. Of course, I had been doing a little flying even before I was inducted into the Air Force. But that was a big thing for me to be part of that movement.
Well, I understand that when the Tuskegee experiment began, it was in early 1941, and it lasted all the way until I think it was 1945, just after the war had ended with Europe. And during that time, it was a total of about 996, or somewhere in that neighborhood, of Tuskegee Airmen that had actually come through Moton Field and graduated. And it's important for our audience to understand that the Tuskegee Airmen just don't include the airmen themselves, but you had other individuals that was part of that Tuskegee experience. Those were the wives that are kind of like the unsung heroes that had to stand behind their husbands and help push them forward. You had all of the ground personnel that was a part of that nobody knows, because you had to have mechanics, you had to have all of these ground support people. That was the Tuskegee Airmen experience. And so after all of that, you guys overcame. And when you ended up over initially, out of Tuskegee Airmen, they created the 99th Pursuit Squadron. It ended up over in North Africa and everything. Then you guys were flying missions over there. But I understand that they were considering disbanding this mission because you guys didn't have any kills. You were kind of disorientated in terms of positions, in terms of what the government thought. And Colonel Davis had to come back to America and talk to Congress. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, the idea was that as far as the black pilots are concerned, the War Department and some of the officials in the War Department felt that they could not cut the mustard as far as being good combat pilots. But they later on just found out that that was not true, that they were as good as some of the other pilots in the Air Force. And they had a excellent record as far as combat flying was concerned.
Well, I understand with that record that when they were in North Africa, they called Colonel Davis back to testify before the United States Senate. And when he got back here into the country, Colonel Davis at the time, and now when he passed away, unfortunately, just a few years ago, was a 4-star general. But at the time when he had to come back and testify before Congress, he had to explain why they shouldn't disband the Tuskegee Airmen. And Colonel Davis said, first of all, we're not in a war environment. We're not in a war theater. And so we can't have combat missions because we're not there fighting people. At the same time, he says our ranks are no different than any other outfit out there. So how can we be different than other outfits? And the last thing, and it was one of the profound statements that Colonel Davis had made to the United States Senate is, how am I to feel about my country when I don't know how my country feels about me? And when the Congress heard, the Senate heard that, they turned around and they said, we're going to send you back, but you're not going to go. We're going to move you out of North Africa and then over to Ramatelli, Italy. And then we'll take up on that story here in just a second, because it looks like we got another question coming in. Tell us about one of those missions you flew as a Tuskegee Airman.
Well, most of my missions were training missions, and I saw very little combat. And after when the war came to an end, I came back to Tuskegee as a flight instructor. And after that, I was discharged from the service and operated a airline called International Air Association, and we operated a Douglas DC-7. And we were doing flights down through the Caribbean and the continental United States also. Yeah.
Wow. You know, and I'm going to just go back over to Ramatelli, Italy, for just a brief second, because I think it's important for our audience to understand a little bit more about that portion of the history, which is where the term red tails came from. And when Colonel Davis got his troops moved over to Ramatelli, Italy, they were actually now in the military theater. And while they were based there, they were segregated from the other bases, the white bases over there. They brought in brand new P-51 Mustangs for the 99th Pursuit Squadron. The B-17s were pretty much crewed by all of the other bases that were not the African American bases, and they would fly up over Germany, and I recall hearing the story of one mission that had 1,000 airplanes, and each one of these airplanes crewed 10 men on each one of them, 10, 11 men. They went over to Germany to drop their load and everything, and then when they came back, they had 500 airplanes. In other words, they lost over 5,000 men in one raid. And then they came back, and the Air Force had a problem, and they told Colonel Davis, we got a problem. And Colonel Davis, we said we need escorts to get us over to our targets. So Colonel Davis ordered his men to fly escort over to the target. So what they did is they created a fuel tank, a drop tank, with retrofitted on the P-51s that gave them an extended range to get there. And he ordered his men, whatever you do, don't leave the bombers. Because they had airplanes coming in and attacking the bombers and everything. And then after that, so when they started escorting the bombers, they were being attacked by the Germans, and we lost some of the Tuskegee Airmen during those operations. But there's only one outfit, from what I understand, the Tuskegee Airmen, that has a claim to fame that they never lost a bomber to enemy action. That's phenomenal, and you know, you're part of that experience.
Yes.
And that's something that our not only our children but the entire world should understand, why we cherish individuals like yourself. And then after that was over, you had to come back, and then you had to fight again. And you're still, here it is, that was in 1945, here it is in 2016, and you're still fighting the fight.
Yes, we are. Yes.
And you're giving information to these young people that here's an opportunity for you to follow in my footsteps. Because if it hadn't been for the courage that all of you had shown back then, there wouldn't have been a next generation of pilots that came along, and then the next generation, which would have been my generation, which where I came along, to stand on each other's shoulders, that built us up to allow me the opportunity and the future opportunities. I would like to take the remaining time to have you, whatever you would like to say to our audience out there.
Well, I've been involved in aviation most of my life. And as a young man, I had the opportunity to fly with a pioneer aviator by the name of Clarence Chamberlain, and he was the second man to fly the Atlantic Ocean. And after that, I was looking at the news, reading an article in the newspaper about a black pilot, and of course, during those days, black pilots were not very many of them. And this man's name was C. Alfred Anderson, better known to most folks as Chief Anderson. And my father took me out to a place in Virginia, and there was a little 40-horsepower Cub sitting in the middle of the field, and the pilot was C. Alfred Anderson. Of course, back there, I only knew him as C. Alfred Anderson. I did not recognize him as being known as Chief Anderson. And so my father shelled out, I think it was about $3 or $4, and I got a ride in this 40-horsepower Piper Cub. And when we came down, I told my father the airplane was going 140 miles an hour, but in reality, I was looking at the engine temperature, which was indicating 50 miles an hour, and I thought the airplane was going 140 miles an hour. And then after that, after my school days, I ended up in Chicago at the Coffee School of Aeronautics, where I took a private pilot's course, and then a few years later, a few months later, the Air Force came along, and I ended up at Tuskegee, and after the Tuskegee program, I was involved in a airline which is called International Air Association, where we operated a 4-engine Douglas DC-7 out of Martin State Airport here in Maryland. And so that's the story of my aviation career. Of course, I became a certified flight instructor and instructed people at an airport here in Maryland called Hyde Field. And so that's about it.
Well, I have one final question for you, if you wouldn't mind answering. And would you mind telling us how old you are?
Yeah, I'm 93.
Wow.
Yeah.
93 years old. 93 years old. And so you've been flying most of your life?
Up until the last 2 years,
Wow.
because when you reach this age, it's kind of hard to pass the FAA physical. Yeah.
But the love of aviation and aerospace is still there with you, and Mr. Jones,
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough, and to let you know how honored that we truly are to have you here and to be able to share with these young people. I want you to know that if you never have a chance to meet one of these folks in person, but this is a unique opportunity that you will have to tell your grandchildren that you had a chance to see one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. Thank you for being here.